today we will be discussing how to craft the PR and marketing strategies that position your company to be successful for a capital raise, how to think creatively about value propositions and growth strategies, and how to navigate the current marketplace. Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Parag and Elizabeth. Parag is a managing director at Outcome Capital. He helps entrepreneurs realize the full value of their vision through a successful exit or financing transaction. Having scaled several venture-backed companies, he appreciates the peaks and valleys of the entrepreneurial journey. His deep operating and professional venture investment experience enables him to be a trusted advisor to CEOs and companies across the growth spectrum. Parag serves on the board of directors of Mindshare. Elizabeth, who many of you know, serves as an EVP running the public relations and strategic communications practice area of REQ. Elizabeth came to REQ through the strategic acquisition of Speakerbox Communications, a public relations and content firm serving the technology sector. She is active in the technology and entrepreneurial ecosystem and supports REQ clients with strategic communications, direction, and counsel. She serves as a board chair for the Technology Marketing Alliance and on the board of Mindshare, an invitation-only member-based organization of CEOs. Parag and Elizabeth have worked together in this ecosystem and have supported each other's interests over the years. Parag and Elizabeth, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Emily. I appreciate it. So, Parag, thank you for joining us, and we're pretty excited about our program today. We are going to be diving into just the world of venture capital and other investment vehicles, and then talking about how to address it from a communication standpoint and marketing. So, if maybe you want to introduce yourself, Parag, a little bit about Outcome Capital.
Yeah, so Outcome Capital, thanks Elizabeth and thanks Emily. So we are a boutique M&A firm which is largely led by folks who've been operators. In other words, we've been in entrepreneurs' shoes. We focus on tech and tech-enabled services, healthcare IT, as well as life sciences. Two things we do: we do M&A as well as help companies raise growth capital. I've been with the firm for a while. I've got, as Emily mentioned, background in operating companies, scaling venture-backed companies, investing in companies, and as well as M&A. More specific to this topic, though, you know, I've been on the other side where I've been a PR customer, if you will, and my view's always been that having thoughtful PR marketing, even at the early stages of a business, is critical to create the brand value, because the thing you're trying to do is distinguish yourself from the competition, especially if you're in a field that is popular, let's just say, whether it's cyber or healthcare or something along those lines, it does help. And so that's kind of where we focus on and how we see PR adding value to companies here.
Perfect. So I think that's one of the reasons why Parag and I have worked so well together and over the years, and particularly with, say, an organization like Mindshare. Of course, my dog had to bark right then, and so that was inevitable. At any rate, so one of the things that I will put a plug in for REQ is we look at what we would call 4 destinations of what typically technology companies are looking to accomplish. And one, and the most fundamental one, is fundraising and trying to raise capital. So that's one. A second destination is lead generation. A third destination is recruiting. And a fourth is thought leadership. So with those 4 destinations potentially driving very different programs, this gives us the ability to really focus in on what it is you need to do in a fundraising environment. So that's one of the reasons why we're here together. So on that note, maybe I can just kick it off to you, Parag, and I'll put my phone on mute to talk a little bit about the various kinds of capital one can raise.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, we lost you there on the audio for a moment, but we'll pick it up. So, one of the things that I often get asked from folks is, what type of capital source is the right one for me? And I don't know exactly who's in the audience, but what I've seen is there are folks across the spectrum when it comes to raising capital. There are folks who've never raised capital for who it's a very could be a very challenging time for the business. And there are folks who've done it enough times where they just know it like the back of the hand. So just to kind of walk our audience through, right? So depending on where you are in the stage of your business, it comes down to a handful of places. There is the opportunity to go out and say, look, I'm an early stage company, really have nothing but an idea. I've had a good background in terms of executing on prior businesses, whether it's within a company or whether it's within or you've done another business before, doesn't matter. If you've got a track record of executing the plans and now you've got an idea and you're just starting to raise capital, typically, seed capital is where a lot of these folks will start. If you've grown the business a little bit and you're now looking for that next step, to say, look, if I had a little bit more capital, I could invest in sales and marketing. I could invest in expanding our footprint. Again, just these are very general things that I'm suggesting, but typically that's when folks go out to venture investors and or strategics to go look for that next infusion of capital. There are folks who don't want to dilute themselves, and for them, there's certainly debt available, and there's a variety of different debt vehicles in the marketplace that they can look at. And at the third stage, they just kind of, looking at the higher end of the spectrum, companies have grown, they've bootstrapped the business, I've been in their shoes, and now they really feel that now they're ready. The product market traction has obviously been proven. They're now ready to go out and really put the gas in the engine and get going. And that's where the growth equity stuff comes in, right? You hear about growth equity, you hear about private equity, and those are all just really larger checks and different forms of larger checks. And that's where those folks get in. So hopefully that kind of paints the picture for the 3 or 4 different buckets that typically venture capital or capital gets organized into.
Perfect. Well, that's probably a good segue into a poll that we'd like to, I think Emily is going to throw on the screen if we're able to quickly answer.
Absolutely. So you should see a pop-up screen that runs through 3 different questions that we would like to hear from you on. Are you seeing company valuations higher or lower than you anticipated? Have you raised capital in the last 6 months? And the third question, are you considering fundraising or exiting in the next 6 months? So I will go ahead and give people just a couple of minutes here to answer, and then we will review the results together. Is everyone able to see the poll results? Elizabeth and Parag, are you able to see them?
Yes, I can see them. Thank you.
Great. So it looks like 43 of our respondents are seeing valuations that are not, are higher or lower than what they sort of anticipated, which is very interesting.
43%.
43%, correct. And then for raising capital, we have a pretty even split here, which is interesting. So 43% of respondents have raised capital in the last 6 months, and 43% have not, with a 14% of our attendees saying that they are considering it for the future. On this last question here, it looks like we're split 57 to 43 for considering fundraising or exiting in the next 6 months.
Very interesting. So,
Very interesting.
So let's dive right on in then. Thank you for that, Emily. So Parag, when you talked about the different kind of investors, I think that's one of the things that we do find that we start to do in our process, the communications process, which is to build a buyer persona almost. Marketers are accustomed to building a buyer persona for lead generation. Well, we also think that's important to really have a sense for what that investor looks like. Whether is this person regional, is it a strategic acquirer and or investor? What type of industries are they in? So really developing what that persona looks like, and then you can build a communications plan from that standpoint. So, I mean, if you took a look at what is it that you would like, where would you like these fundings to come from? That's going to be the first step in that process. So can you talk a little bit more about how one might reach some of these folks and where they live, if you will?
Yeah. No, I think that is probably the most commonly asked question is how do I find investors? And, especially right now, right? I mean, everyone is sort of stuck wherever they are and are not able to travel, both the investors as well as the businesses, the entrepreneurs. And I think there are a handful of things that I can suggest, right? I think the first and foremost is really reaching out to your network. I think the best way, what I've found, especially when we've been raising capital in my past lives, is the best way to get in front of an investor is to use your network. See who knows who. I think LinkedIn always works really well in terms of figuring out who's connected to the investors that you want to reach at. And then having a warm introduction is by far the most effective way to get there. I think one thing I would say though, before reaching out to investors, just do your homework to say, look at their website, look at the profile of companies that they invest in, look at the types of deals they've done, and say, does this resonate with the kind of capital that I'm trying to raise? Because the thing with every investor is they all have their profile that they go after, and by that I mean, there are investors who are going to only invest in early stage companies because that's their thesis. There are others who are going to say, look, I'm only going to invest in a later stage business. Another way to think about it is, there are folks who only write a $2 to $5 million check, and if you're looking for a $20 million check, that's not the folks that you're going after, right? And vice versa. So really just start with just doing some homework to say, hey, who are the investors that are investing in my segment? Who are the, and how can I get to them? The other piece that I find really helpful is peer-to-peer, right? So there is the network, but there is also the other peers. If you're a CEO, talk to other CEOs who've raised capital. I find that most CEOs are pretty open about making the recommendations and saying, look, here's who I spoke with. The last piece certainly is, and when hopefully we'll get back to this soon, much like the entrepreneurs, the investors are also out at shows, right? So if it's a very specific show that you are that is for your market. So as an example, if it's a ServiceNow provider, a Salesforce App Exchange solution, they go to those shows, and as do the investors, and so they're looking for the right folks. So I'd say really it's a very broad swath of how you find investors, but it just starts with doing a lot of legwork on your own, figuring out their profile, seeing who you're connected with, and then certainly, the old shoe leather thing works.
Yes. So I'll add on to that. One of the things that we think in the spirit of doing your homework is important is, and we've advised some of our clients to make sure that in their marketing mix, to look at the investor as another alternative audience. So the kinds of things that an investor might find interesting, and you can confirm or deny, Parag, are things like press releases about your growth or hitting milestones. So while that might not necessarily be interesting to a potential customer or prospect, it's certainly interesting to an investor. So they look at things like the press releases, and it might make sense to have them be put on the wire, even if it's not something that would be typically picked up. Another big thing that we understand investors will look for are awards. So the fastest growing company type of awards, the Inc. 5000, the Deloitte Fast 500, any kind of awards that feature leadership, such as, the Entrepreneur of the Year type awards, because those are the kinds of qualities that those investors are going to be looking at for validation. So if those things are out there already, it's really important to maintain that online presence. And it also might be surprising for some folks that the analysts, the technology analysts, the Gartners and the Forresters of the world, they're also going to be potentially providing some of that validation for who the market leaders are, and investors want to back market leaders. So it's really important to do that homework first and be thoughtful about where you fall in the grand scheme of seeing what bucket you're in, if you will. So those are some other things that we think you can do from a standpoint of just being prepared and doing your homework.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because it is trying to get the word out in a meaningful, methodical way through the different channels that you have. And I mentioned one part, you're talking about the other part, and that makes sense too. And folks like us, who've got deep relationships with the financial sponsors, with the strategic sponsors, that's yet another way to look at it. So, yeah.
Yes, so maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Parag, how you actually track some of these companies. What are things, are there any examples you can give of situations where you were pleasantly surprised by somebody getting your attention in a unique way?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a two-way street, right? So, one of the things you'll find with a lot of investors is they end up, to your point about when the press release goes out or when they're part of an award, a lot of investors will end up tracking companies that they feel, that they believe are into their sweet spot. They'll track them for a few months, sometimes even a year, and from an entrepreneur standpoint, it really is important to build that relationship over time with the potential investor. And the reason for that really is it comes down to a trust factor, a cultural fit factor, right? Most of the times when a business and an investor enter a relationship, it's going to be a long-term relationship. It's not, hey, I'm going to invest my capital today and then tomorrow morning we're out, or even a year or 2 years. Sometimes those things go on for 5-7 years. And so you really want to be sure that you are well aligned with the objectives, why you're taking capital, what is the end goal, are you and the investor culturally aligned? And so to do that, I've personally gone out and met folks and found a business that's interesting, and taken about a year or so to build the relationship with the CEO directly, as well as meet the management team, because the relationship is not just the CEO. The entire investment is about the management team. Ultimately, that's what you're looking for, and so you want to get comfortable with saying, is this the management team that can execute the plan? So yeah, there are several instances where I've spent well over 12 months trying to build relationships, and then ended up investing in them.
So it's often been noted that a brand is sometimes as important as a balance sheet. Would you confirm that?
Yeah, it matters, right? Yes, and it is backed up by the brand in the early stage business. Is the management team, is their ability to execute, and it's their ability to say, look, we can deliver what we say we're going to do. But it's promoted by the vehicles you say, which is how do you get that in front of people often?
Right.
System.
Well, I'll shift gears a little bit and talk about PR strategies that we've seen worked. And one of the sort of jumping off of a question that we had from an attendee before the event, which was, what do you do differently if you're trying to get in front of a strategic investor? And I know you have some perspectives on that, but I know that from our standpoint, if someone says, I really am thinking that the perfect type of investor would be either a customer that wants to help develop the technology together, or perhaps someone that might be a future acquisition target. One of the things that we have found is to, again, try to build that persona as to where is it that they live, where is it that they congregate. And again, it's different to a certain extent now because of virtual conferences, but making sure that you're in front of them. We actually had a client who was very specific about, I think that we would be best suited by getting some money from either Symantec or CA or Oracle or what have you, and they're all in Silicon Valley. So that might mean that we would look to gain visibility in the media in Silicon Valley, and the San Jose Mercury News as opposed to the Washington Post. So being thoughtful about how you can very specifically direct the tactics that map to those strategic investors. So I think you have some commentary on strategic investors and how they're different and what to consider in that case.
Yeah.
That's an option for you.
Absolutely. So, early on I mentioned, right, there are different categories of investors. You've got folks who are doing the early stage, who are growth equity, and then private equity stage. But the strategics are interesting, and they certainly can be an investor in an early stage business or at any stage of the business. I think the question that you have to ask yourself, there are a handful of them, right? One is what happens to the rest of the field when you take a strategic investment. And I'm not, if you, as an example, if you were to take capital from Symantec, or then does that preclude the other companies that are competitors to Symantec from doing business with you, right? Or is there a strategic outcome that is agreed upon as you kind of think about this, right? So that's the probably the first and foremost part that I tend to look for. I'd rather have them as a customer, along, and maybe make them a strategic partner over time. The second thing is, again, strategics are great, but they tend to take a longer time to close. And the reason, is just venture investors tend to move faster because it really is a small group of folks that are making a decision on go, no go when it comes to investment, right? Whereas if you're a strategic, yeah, they have their own committee, but they just tend to move a little bit slower than the venture firms do. And the last piece is, they're great to come alongside some of the other investors. It's not either or. You can find a strategic, that's great, but if you've got another anchor tenant, strategics will usually come along either then or later on. So there is not a hard and fast rule as to when they come, but I'd just be mindful of some of these things. And the most prominent one is, what happens to your other, to your others in the market.
Yes, exactly. So let's talk about actually the funding process itself. So once, an entrepreneur is out there, they're looking to raise, that A round, if you will, and the investors are super excited, they're maybe back in, and we want to build a marketing campaign around that. So I know from our standpoint, we tend to want to really be thoughtful about how that message is communicated and how it's carried out in the media. Is it worthy of an exclusive with a TechCrunch or a publication like that? Is it better to have it communicated to the actual industry that you're in? What do you like to see as the investor?
Yeah.
What do you like to see your entrepreneurs?
Good question. I think, look, everything that happens has an outcome tied to it, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you are going to make an announcement, ideally you have a customer involved, which says, hey, look, not only did we raise capital, but we've got customers who trust us, who believe with us, who are partners with us, and they're willing to go out and effectively be a testimonial for us. I think nothing better like that. And to be able to go out and tell that to the market, which hopefully drives new deals, that's the ultimate outcome you want from something like this. And in other cases, it might be very strategic. It just depends on what the business, what is the reason for going out to the market, whether it's a broad, whether it's a narrow. And so those are the things I'd consider in terms of, to your, as you said in your, you talk about exclusives versus, but the way I think about it is, what does that get the business, right? And so there's not a right answer. It's just very situational in every case.
Yes, I do find that it's not uncommon for a CEO potentially to say, I really want to get in the Wall Street Journal. And that usually dictates that there's probably some sort of fundraising initiative or announcement that we're trying to move towards. Mm-hmm. And, it's not that often that we can get coverage in the Wall Street Journal for a company that's private. So it has to be either a pretty significant investor or name brand, if you will. So, and we've had some clients who don't want to make an announcement at all because they're either potentially looking to make additional acquisitions or it's part of a bigger strategy. So we do need to think about what are the repercussions of an announcement, but even more importantly, let's make sure it doesn't get leaked, which could also potentially be detrimental. So
yeah. And the way I like to think about it, I think it's a journey, right? I mean, there's a starting point, and you're leading your audience to the journey, and there are different stops along the way. And in some cases, that stop may be a one-shop stop, so call it, whether you call it TechCrunch or something. In other cases, it may be a broader stop where it's a broader audience. But each of them have certain milestones that you're hoping to achieve as a result of it. In some cases, it may be getting in front of a certain audience for a certain reason, whether it's fundraising or otherwise. In other case, it may well be that, look, I need to do this because you're trying to create a competitive message to a competitor who's been out in the market. And in another case, it might well be about customer acquisition. So really, every one of those opportunities to talk with the audience has a has a reason, has a rationale that's business related, right?
Yes, actually, that's a really interesting point, or good point, because I think there is a lot of validation that your customers, that a company's customers might want to see, and the fact that there's some good money behind it, and it's from a reputable, investor and or VC or what have you, that really does help show that this company is not going to run out of money. Potentially, this company has the runway, it has the backing of people that have really vetted it. So there's certainly a good lead acquisition, lead generation type of message from to consider in this case. So, and I also like your comment about the journey. I think what we have found is that you really never can stop marketing to investors once you rip off that Band-Aid and go down that road. So, there's a pre-marketing, if you will. During the process, there's continual affirmation of the kinds of things you're doing are right. We've had clients where, let's say you have a website and there are 3 or 4 slider panels on the home page. One of them should be addressed to your investors to help give them, with the right kind of messaging to give them the confidence that these are the kinds of things that you're doing right, particularly if you're looking for some follow-on money down the road. So there's all kinds of things to think about in the journey, and we'll often suggest that if fundraising is a priority, that you start 12 to 18 months with your digital presence and with the kinds of marketing activities to that audience, so that you're already there by the time you start to really go down the path. So it's an interesting journey for sure.
It is, and it's interesting you say that, because I just, as I said, it's a 12, 18-month cycle for an investor to have that build that relationship. So it's very coincident with what you're saying, right?
So kind of be mindful of that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm watching the hour. Were there any questions that came in, Emily?
Yes, we have a couple.
Okay.
This is one from an attendee. If we have a limited PR and marketing team, how would you suggest we prioritize our activities to ensure we're positioned for that capital raise?
No, that's a great question. So I would say that with a limited PR team and or budget, to be able to focus on as many positive things that don't cost money. Like, for example, if you put a press release on the wire, you can make some decisions on whether you use a service like Business Wire, which tends to be more expensive than a service like PR Web. The important thing is to just make sure that it's found and it can come up in search engine results. I think really making sure that you optimize your website for the right kind of search engine optimization based on your terms, so that you can have, it's a very strategic way to make sure that you come up when they're searching on certain topics. I think awards, some of them do cost money, but I do think that is a very, assuming you have the growth record there and you have the track record, I think it's a really smart way to, again, build that visibility in front of that group. You may not need to do a lot of proactive PR outreach per se, but there are some things that you can be done that you can do that can be not that heavy a lift. So those are probably the things that I would start with. Do you have anything to add to that, Parag?
No, I think that makes sense. I think, look, cost effective, right? It's a so what factor. It needs to be cost effective, and you can show the results, and then you see the results and you build on that. So yeah.
Yes.
Great, thank you both. We did have another question come in. Given that it's been sort of an unusual year and looks to be continuing, do you have any predictions for the rest of 2020 and what we might expect? Does this compare to any other year in your experience?
I can definitely say it doesn't compare to any other year in my experience, no.
I would agree with that.
And I hope it never comes up again too. But no, I think, look, everyone's had a very challenging time starting from March onwards, whether you were operating a business, whether you were trying to go out and raise capital, whether you were trying to create an exit. The first few weeks of the pandemic, I think everyone was just trying to get their feet on the ground and figure out what's next. I think the most fundamental things that I saw all the businesses do was to just make sure that they had enough runway, right? They preserved their capital. They made sure they had enough runway to survive, and then, we'll worry about thriving afterwards. So, the lens with which the investor community typically views the entrepreneurs is on growth. And I think this year it was about stay flat, and that's okay, right? Largely speaking, I think that's where the investors focused on, is just to survive the year. What I have seen though is, I'll say this, that, I think while Q2 was definitely slower in terms of fundraising and the amount of deals that got done, as well as the capital that got invested, I think we're starting to turn slowly but surely. My sense is, and this is based on data, we just did a pretty deep dive into some of the stuff going on in the market. My sense is that Q4, we're going to start seeing more opportunities come to fruition, both on the fundraising side as well as the exit aspects, right? And part of the reason is, there are a handful of reasons here. One, I think the people have gotten a little bit more comfortable doing what we're doing, which is talking with folks over Zoom. Especially if you're an investor, whether you're looking to acquire a business, whether you're looking to inject growth equity into a business, people have gotten comfortable having a fair amount of conversation over Zoom. I think the second thing that has happened is, and especially in the world of M&A, as well as capital infusion, raising capital, the management meetings are key, right? That's the diligence part. You do a lot of other diligence, you can do that remotely, but you have to meet the management team in person. And I've started seeing folks do the socially distanced meeting outside. And I think that's as a result, there are deals that are getting done. So we're not seeing a lot of West Coast investors come to the East Coast yet, but there are folks who are driving up and down. The third thing I will say is, there are deals that had started before the pandemic, and we're starting to see those come to closure as well. And in both of those instances, if you're a B2B with business with large enterprises, your customers, your valuations have largely stayed the same. They didn't get dinged too much. B2C or small business target markets, they definitely got hurt a little bit. And the last piece, I think, to the reason why this will turn is, there is just a lot of capital that is still available. And I think much like on the operating side of the business, there are customers who need your goods. Well, at the end of the day, the capital needs a place to go out and grow. And I think that's why you're going to start seeing both M&A activity pick up, as well as the ability to invest into companies pick up.
No, I totally agree. If I can add on to that from a communication standpoint, what we're actually seeing is, if your business model is well suited in this environment to adapt to this environment, the companies that we're seeing really kill it are the ones that are doubling down, and from a marketing standpoint, and really being aggressive and getting in front of investors so that they can make sure that they bring in that runway that they can manage the runway. So we've seen downturns before. I think this one's obviously a little bit more unique because of just the inability to get together in person. But I think there's an opportunity, and I think you're going to see a lot more creativity emerge from this in the marketing front. I think you're going to see a lot more creative content. You're going to see a lot more creativity going to these virtual conferences, which are probably going to be there for some time. So I do think there's going to be, if you can really put on a creativity hat, that doesn't cost a lot of money, but it can go a long way in terms of making sure that you can make it through this and look really attractive to investors. I will say, I had this one client say they were looking for they were looking to fundraise, and were worried about them vis-a-vis their competition, and their competition raised a lot of money. And they said, well, the irony is, even though they've raised all this money, they're not really putting it to use right now in the way that we can put it to use. And we look just as big as they are, because online everything looks the same. Right. They don't have a giant 40 by 40 booth at CES, and so it kind of levels the playing field. I think Gives you an opportunity.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think looking larger than you are certainly helps, and that's where having marketing, having the presence on the web makes people feel that, okay, it's real.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you both. We did have one more question come in, and then I'll kick it back to you guys. Do you have any recommended reading, either publications or books, for people who want to learn more on this topic?
It's a good question. I don't know that I've seen many on this particular topic. communication strategies for fundraising. Maybe we
And I
need
think
maybe we need to write one.
What publications would you guys recommend for people who are wanting to learn more about capital fundraising and or track the market more closely?
I think though, depending on the industry, and let's just assume a lot of the folks around the webinar are tech folks. There are, the thing I find, I'm a voracious reader, I read everything, but the thing I find insightful is learning from other people, right? And so to that end, I've always sought out things like interviews of CEOs who said, hey, how I did this sort of thing, right? There are podcasts actually now available of how I did this. And if you haven't listened to that series, it's actually pretty phenomenal. There are podcasts on venture fundraising. But I think the ability to go speak with folks who've been there, done that, or to speak with folks at the other side, even investors, they'll help you along. I mean, I'm happy to chat with anybody and say, look, here's what you do, right? So I think reaching out to folks who have been in your shoes and have had a track record of doing something, whether it's through direct conversation, whether it's through reading different articles, or whether it's through finding publications to do that.
Yeah, the other thing I would add there are venture capital associations all across the country,
does that, yeah.
Regional and by state and by topics. And so there are conferences, and a lot of them are virtual now, where you're able to learn what people are looking for and be able to tailor your message in effect to what they might be saying or what they might be doing. There are many of those pitch competitions. So you can ask either Parag or I if you had any specific requests for wanting to be in one. There's a bunch of them around town. A lot of them are virtual now. And a lot of them are opening up, like, for example, we've been involved in the REQ+A Capital Call, and with that one, it's gone virtual. So now it doesn't have to be just a regional show today. It has gone national, and you can apply to pitch basically the ecosystem of investors and service provider support people. So take a look at that. And then someone just popped up with a
yes.
Oh,
one of our attendees sent through a link for NPR's How I Built This Podcast, which Parag, I think you just made reference.
Yeah, that's the one I was just referencing. That's a great example of learning how to do something. They've got really successful CEOs and other folks on there.
Yeah, and then publications that cover the venture community would include TechCrunch, GigaOM, and a lot of the business journals will cover, the local business journals will cover venture capital deals and oftentimes highlight investors. There are awards for investors, so there's no shortage of attention being shined on that community.
That's great. Thank you both. That covers most of the questions that have come through.
Okay. Well, I don't know that we need to take a full hour, but I think this is just such a great topic, and one that not necessarily people think about when they are looking to fundraise, and what is it that you might need to be thinking about or doing. So I'm hoping that this gave some good insight into the way to treat this audience, just as you would. It's just as important as a customer audience or an employee audience. There should be a channel of communication and a way to really nurture that community through your company.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, guys, thanks to everyone that attended the webinar. I think we've got another one in a few weeks on M&A specifically.
Yes.
So feel free to join that. I think the invitations will go out, the announcement will go out shortly. But thanks again for being here. And if there are any questions, please reach out to the folks in the audience.